Before time had name, before suns were born and galaxies spiraled in their graceful dance, there were things adrift in the nothingness. They had no shape, no purpose. They were not alive as the mortal races would understand it, nor were they dead. They were vast, ineffable presences, consciousnesses without form, drifting on solar winds through the infinite black. These were the Citan. Long before the birth of stars as we know them, these entities formed in the interstellar voids where matter was scarce but energy was plentiful. Drawn to the radiation of stars, they stirred. For eons uncounted, they lingered on the edges of suns, absorbing the power of fusion and awakening from dormancy. Their first hunger was not for flesh or soul, but for light and heat, pure stellar energy. They grew stronger, more coherent. Where once they had been little more than nebulous clouds of sentient energy, they began to shape themselves slowly, deliberately, into intelligences vast and terrible. In the tongue of the necrontyr, long before their transformation into the necrons, these beings would later be called Citan, the star gods. But in the age before names, they were simply predators. The Citan did not walk. They did not speak. They were. Their thoughts rippled across the void, and where their awareness focused, gravity bent and space quivered. Their minds were alien, incomprehensible, utterly divorced from mortal thought. There were no emotions in them, only hunger, a boundless, eternal hunger for sustenance. As they drew more deeply from the heart of stars, they learned. Stellar radiation was satisfying but lacking. And then, through sheer chance or design, one of them drifted near a planet. There, crawling like insects under a poisonous sun, was life, sentient life. The Citan tasted a soul, and everything changed. Where starfire had nourished them, the soul of a mortal brought ecstasy. It burned hotter, it burned deeper. To consume a soul was not merely to feed, it was to dominate, to understand, to become. They discovered meaning in annihilation, and from that revelation came transformation. No longer content to drift in stellar silence, the Citan turned their awareness toward the galaxy. No longer were they passive feeders of light, they had become apex predators of existence itself. But feeding from the flesh and soul of mortals presented a problem. They had no means to interact with physical life in the traditional sense. Their energy forms, though powerful, were formless, incapable of true physical manipulation. The solution would come later, through the necrontyr, but the intent was already forming in their minds. The Citan would need vessels, shells of matter that could contain their energy forms and allow them to act upon the physical realm directly. They needed avatars, and they would have them. In this age, each Citan was unique. They did not share knowledge, they did not communicate. They were gods unto themselves. Each drifted alone across the stars, hunting sentient life when it was found, but rarely intervening in galactic affairs beyond their need to feed. Entire species were extinguished without memory. Whole biospheres died in silence. The races of that ancient time, the old ones, the Krork, the slithering creations born of the warp, felt the presence of something vast and predatory moving across the heavens. Some named them, others fled. Few understood them. It was the old ones, masters of the warp and genetic alchemy, who first recognized the threat. Though even their wisdom could not comprehend the nature of the Citan, they catalogued their effects. Planets that died with no sign of war, star systems gone quiet, souls devoured by an invisible hand. But the old ones were too busy with their own empires, their own designs. They did not act quickly enough. The Citan multiplied, not in number but in strength. Each one grew in power, fed on stars and souls. Their presence shaped reality. Some began to develop personas, distinguishable traits that would, in time, be given names by the necrontyr. The Nightbringer, the Deceiver, The Void Dragon, the Outsider, archetypes of death, of lies, of entropy. But in this era, they were unnamed terrors. Only their hunger had clarity. They learned to watch, to wait, to understand the rise and fall of mortal civilizations. And in doing so, they saw opportunity. For a race would come, cursed and proud, angry at the injustice of their mortality, the necrontyr. But that comes later. For now, the Citan were still phantoms, starborn titans moving between galaxies, seeking the taste of sentience, the rapture of a dying scream. They were perfect predators in a universe that had not yet learned to fear them. They were not gods yet, but they would be. This was the beginning, when the stars trembled and the first cold hunger opened its eyes. The necrontyr were a race forged in agony. Their empire stretched across the stars, a web of obsidian tomb cities clinging to irradiated worlds. Their sun, a cruel and merciless orb, bathed their homeworld in death. Even in youth, their flesh withered. In age, their bones blackened. Their lives were brief and burdened, their minds sharpened by the knowledge that death would come early and without mercy. But despite their suffering, the necrontyr were not a people to break. They endured. They built. Their hatred of their fate became the fuel for their conquests, and their empire clawed its way outward, like a dying beast trying to bite the stars. Obsessed with the mysteries of mortality, they crafted vast observatories and city-sized tombs in the void. They worshipped death not as a god, but as a tyrant, one they would one day overthrow. It was in this era when their hatred for the Old Ones, immortal masters of the galaxy, burned brightest that the necrontyr first encountered the Citan. The contact was not diplomatic. It was not heralded by emissaries or warships. It was the result of pure astronomical curiosity, as the necrontyr, ever hungry to understand the stars and the forces that shape them, detected anomalies in the movement of solar bodies. There were patterns that defied gravity, heat signatures that did not match the stars they orbited. Something was feeding on the suns themselves. They did not know it, but they had discovered a god. The first entity they would awaken was not the Deceiver, as later legends would claim, but the Nightbringer. In the necrontyr's fragmented astrographic records, it is referred to only as Antranacht, the dying shadow. What they found was not a being in the traditional sense, but a shimmer of impossible distortion, tethered to a dying star at the edge of their influence. It moved with slow purpose, as if it barely noticed the physical realm. Its presence froze sensor arrays. Electromagnetic storms bled from its wake. Where it drifted, solar flares curved unnaturally, casting jagged shadows across the void. But the necrontyr, in their hubris, reached out. They sent a beacon signal encoded with quantum resonance patterns, an invitation, a challenge, a plea. And the Nightbringer responded. It came not in words, but in hunger. The Citan did not speak, but the Nightbringer communicated through presence, through force of will that made lesser minds tremble. Its awareness brushed against the necrontyr observers like a wave of drowning silence. Scientists screamed and clawed at their faces. Machines failed. Comms broke into static, punctuated by voices that were not their own. And then came the vision. Across the minds of the necrontyr, a shared image burned, a cold void filled with the corpses of stars, their light strangled. A figure cloaked in black flame walked the corpses of suns. It bore a blade not forged of matter, but absence, a wound in reality itself. Where it passed, life withered. Death was no longer an ending. It was a purpose, a calling. The necrontyr did not turn away. They had spent centuries seeking a weapon to wield against their immortal foes. They had found something far greater, a god of death incarnate. It was not long before others came, more anomalies, more whispers, more Satan. Drawn by the necrontyr's technological curiosity and their deep space tomb beacons, the star gods began to converge. Some were subtle, their influence barely perceived. Others, like the Nightbringer, made their presence known in terrible clarity. But the necrontyr needed more than awe. They needed alliance. It was Mephitran, later known as the Deceiver, who first took form among them. While the Nightbringer fed and remained aloof, it was Mephitran who learned their language, who spoke through ancient devices and projected a form that resembled something the necrontyr could understand. It took on a humanoid appearance wrought of liquid metal and starfire, its face shifting constantly, never fully real. It came with promises, immortality, power, vengeance. The necrontyr high dynasts listened, their science priests debated, their warrior kings raged for action. The Deceiver whispered a path forward. The Satan would grant them deliverance from death. They need only serve. The Satan had fed on stars, yes, but the true flavor of the galaxy lay in souls, in sentient thought, in the delicious suffering of beings who knew they were dying, and the necrontyr were full of such souls. Mephitran proposed a great forging, a vessel, a body of living metal, necrodermis, that could house the Satan's consciousness, granting them physical presence in the material universe. In return, the necrontyr would be gifted with new forms, deathless shells, immune to disease, time, or suffering. But to the Nightbringer, this was no alliance. This was preparation. It looked upon the necrontyr as one might regard a field of ripe grain. The god of death, now incarnate, strode upon their worlds. Its necrodermis body was wrought in obsidian and carved with symbols no eye could fully perceive. It towered over the necrontyr, a living statue crowned in shadow. Where it walked, the air grew colder. Mortals dropped to their knees in terror, unable to breathe. Even the Deceiver, for all its manipulation, did not approach the Nightbringer lightly. Its hunger was no longer passive. It fed on necrontyr by the thousands. Cities were consumed in silence. Entire ships vanished without trace. Yet none dared stop it, for the Nightbringer, in its terrible grandeur, had become a symbol. It was the embodiment of what the necrontyr worshipped in secret, the annihilation of mortality itself. The pact was sealed. The necrontyr would become vessels for the Satan, and in doing so they would transcend. But the first to rise among the Satan in full necrodermis form was the Nightbringer, and its awakening was not a blessing. It was the beginning of genocide on a galactic scale. It is said that even the warp recoiled when the Nightbringer first struck down a living god of the Old Ones. Its blade, a weapon of pure unmaking, left no soul to linger in the Imperium. It cleaved existence apart, leaving only silence. And so the stars knew fear. The necrontyr had found their gods, but they had also found something else. They had found the end. In the dim twilight of a dying empire, the necrontyr stood upon the edge of eternity. Their war with the Old Ones had turned into futility, bitter and cold, as endless as the stars. Though their fleets were mighty and their science advanced, their mortality remained an open wound. For every victory, time took its price. For every advancement, death whispered that it would all vanish in the end. And it was from this crucible of futility that the bargain was struck. The Deceiver, Mephitran, had promised them immortality. But like all things born of shadow and manipulation, the promise was not what it seemed. It did not come as a gift wrapped in gold or revelation. It came in the form of fire, machines, screams, and cold metal, a transformation that would unmake them. The project began in secret, beneath the surface of Saracon, the crown world of the necrontyr. There, in vaults blackened by radiation and layered in 1,000 seals of silence, the Satan unveiled the first soul forge. It was not a forge in the traditional sense. It was a prison, a temple, a reaper's scythe. Its true name has long since been lost, even to the Necrons. But its purpose was absolute, to separate soul from flesh. Not through death, but through transference. The necrontyr would no longer be mortal. They would shed their dying bodies and become eternal. At the command of Zarek, the Silent King, the High Dynasties were summoned. The first of the transfers were volunteers, fanatics, desperate or hopeless. They were bound to frames of blackened metal, their bodies incinerated atom by atom, as their neural signatures were ripped from flesh and fused into necrodermis. It was not a clean process. There was no gentle sleep. There were only screams, brief, ragged, then cut off forever. The survivors, the transformed, stood motionless. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire, no longer mortal. They did not speak. They did not weep. They were perfect in silence, eternal, indestructible, soulless. The Citan, feeding on the psychic remnants of each soul as it was flayed from the body, grew stronger. They absorbed the emotional detritus, the agony, the fear, the desperate clinging to life. It was intoxicating. For them, the Soul Forge was not a tool. It was a banquet. And the necrontyr kept coming. They brought their families, their servants, their generals, their philosophers. Billions walked into the Soul Forges. None came back as they were. One by one, dynasties were silenced, not by annihilation, but by cold transformation. The culture, art, memory, all of it was leached out, traded away for the promise of time without end. Those who resisted, the thinkers, the seers, the lovers of life, were silenced by decree. Zarek had made his choice. The future of the necrontyr was not one of suffering and rot. It would be eternal. Steel would not decay. Necrodermis would not age. They would outlive the stars themselves. But in truth, Zarek had condemned his people to damnation. The process of biotransference did not preserve the soul. It shattered it. What remained in the mind of a Necron was only a shadow of their former self, stripped of sensation, emotion dulled to near nothing, and identity filed away like data in a decaying archive. The high nobles retained some of their minds, enough to think, enough to scheme. But the masses became automatons. Their thoughts dimmed, their will became silent. They obeyed, as if their free will had dissolved in the crucible of the Soul Forge. The necrontyr were dead, and in their place the Necrons were born. It was a quiet genocide, not of body but of being. The Silent King had sacrificed the spirit of his people to build a weapon fit for god-slaying, an empire of deathless warriors who could march for millennia without rest, who knew no pain, no fear, no remorse. They did not need to eat. They did not sleep. They obeyed. And the Citan rejoiced. Mephetron smiled, if such a being could smile. The Nightbringer fed without restraint. Other Citan joined the feast, drawn by the echoes of agony that laced the stars. Each one demanded its own dominion, its own share of souls. Some appeared as dragons made of light, others as faceless monoliths with voices that shattered reason. The Necrons built shrines to their star gods, each tomb complex, housing a different horror, bound in metal and fire. Across the galaxy, the Old Ones took notice. They had watched the necrontyr with disdain. Now they watched the Necrons with dread. Immortal, emotionless, and now empowered by gods that fed on sentience itself, the Necrons were no longer a nuisance. They were a cataclysm waiting to be unleashed, and the Citan were ready. Now fully embodied in their necrodermis forms, the star gods strode across real space with impunity. They wielded power far beyond the warp. The Nightbringer's scythe split not flesh but spirit. The deceiver sowed madness with a whisper. The Void Dragon reshaped technology at a glance. Their armies were endless, their hunger infinite. But even in this moment of triumph, a seed of doubt took root. The Silent King, standing at the apex of an empire built on ruin, looked into the eyes of his people and saw nothing looking back. He had saved them, yes, but at what cost? The dynasties were hollow. The nobility plotted in silence. The lower castes no longer remembered who they were. Only the Triarch remained to guide the husk of a civilization. And above them all, the Citan watched. The bargain was done. Immortality had been granted, but the price had already been paid, and the galaxy would burn in the fire of that transaction for millions of years to come. The stars bled fire. Galactic maps once filled with trade routes and migratory paths were replaced by war fronts that spanned the heavens. The great empires of the Old Ones, once serene in their mastery of the warp and the webway, trembled beneath a storm not born of the Imperium, but of matter itself, cold, metallic, and pitiless. The war in heaven had begun. It was not a war of armies alone. It was a war of annihilation. The Citan, now embodied in necrodermis, and fed fat on the pain and souls of the necrontyr turned necrons, strode across the stars like gods unleashed. Their power defied the natural laws of the galaxy. They wielded weapons that could unravel time within a single heartbeat. Their thoughts echoed across worlds, breaking minds and rending sanity. They did not conquer. They consumed. At their command marched the Necron legions, billions of soulless warriors clad in living metal, cold as the void. They came in phalanxes, in monolithic tomb ships, in void-hung obelisks brimming with Gauss energy. Entire planets blinked out of existence under the green light of the Necrons' advance. Civilizations crumbled not because they were defeated in battle, but because there was nothing left to surrender to. The Old Ones, stewards of life and ancient masters of the warp, had never seen such devastation. They had ruled for eons, cultivating younger species, guiding evolution, shaping galaxies like gardeners of the cosmos. Their technology surpassed anything the galaxy had known before or since. They had created the Krork to wage war, seeded psychic life, and tamed the Imperium itself. But the Citan were something new, something they had not planned for. Where warp wielders projected fear and madness, the star gods were dread incarnate. The Citan were not creatures of emotion. They were not bound by the psychic. They did not exist in the same paradigm as demons or sorcerers. They were hunger given thought, entropy given voice. Their weapons bypassed flesh and soul alike. They killed permanence. The Nightbringer led the first assault against the Old One's bastion worlds. His scythe, a blade wrought of negative energy, did not merely sever flesh. It ended essence. There was no afterlife for his victims. No ghosts, no souls screaming into the warp. He devoured them utterly. And with each life extinguished, he grew stronger, darker, colder. To face him in battle was to feel the death of hope itself. The deceiver followed a different path. While the Nightbringer slaughtered openly, Mephiteran infiltrated. He whispered into the minds of the Old One's allies, sowing dissent. On one world, he convinced a vassal race that the Old Ones were hiding the secret of immortality. On another, he appeared as a godchild and drove a civilization to civil war in the name of prophecy. Planets were undone from within, without a single Necron boot touching their soil. It was a campaign of despair. Each Citan led their own cults of personality among the Necron dynasties. The Void Dragon reshaped battlefields with technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. With a thought, he twisted enemy starships into molten ruins, turned weapons into inert sand. The dragon was not a warlord. He was a singularity of technological dominion, and from the dark edges of known space, the outsider watched. He did not lead, he did not march. He consumed in isolation, devouring species whole and leaving only silence. It is said that entire galactic clusters fell to his hunger, and none remember the names of those races, for there is no one left to speak them. Against this horror, the Old Ones stood tall, but they were not gods, and they bled. The war in heaven dragged on for millennia. The Old Ones adapted, building new weapons and creating psychic fortresses to hold the tides of metal and madness at bay. They unleashed their greatest creations, the Krork, green-skinned beasts of war bred for one purpose: to kill gods. These proto-orcs clashed with Necron legions in wars of unimaginable scale. They did not fear death, for they were barely sentient beyond the desire to fight. But even they could not halt the inevitable. The Old Ones turned to the warp, drawing deeper into the Imperium than ever before. They shaped entire races as psychic weapons: the Eldar, the Slann, others whose names have since passed into myth. They hoped to fight fire with fire, to answer cold logic with burning soul. But the warp was a treacherous sea. With each new psychic race birthed, the Imperium roiled. Emotions ran wild, suffering, fear, hatred, all fed into the raw essence of the warp, and from that essence, something stirred. Not the Citan, but something older still, something stranger. The Citan did not understand the warp. They disdained it. It was chaos to their order, madness to their hunger. But it burned them. And when the first stirrings of the warp entities, later known as the Chaos Gods, began to flicker into half-conscious existence, the Citan recoiled. For the warp was the one thing they could not eat. It was the realm of soul unbound, pure thought, pure will. It was antithetical to their very nature. Thus the battlefield shifted. The Citan had power, but the Old Ones had desperation. In their dying moments, they birthed gods of their own, not like the star gods of metal and death, but gods of fire and emotion. But this act of creation was also their doom. They had opened the gates of the Imperium, and it would never again be silent. As the war raged, galaxies darkened, stars flickered out. The void filled with tomb ships and shattered webway gates. Entire species were lost, sacrificed to buy time, to hold back the Citan another day. The galaxy changed. It became crueler, harder, more like the beings who now ruled its night. And slowly victory turned hollow. The Citan had gained dominion. The Old Ones faltered. Their allies lay in ruins, their weapons broken. But the very psychic energy unleashed in their death throes poisoned the galaxy with emotion, birthing instability the Citan could not control. The warp grew deeper, stronger. The galaxy's soul twisted, and for the first time the Citan saw a threat they could not unmake with a blade. The war in heaven was nearing its end, but it would not end in triumph. It would end in betrayal. The Silent King watched the devastation. His people, once proud and brilliant, were now hollow shadows of their former selves, tools of war wielded by gods who grew drunk on annihilation. He had made a bargain for survival. What he had bought was extinction, just delayed long enough for his people to be used as cattle. And in the cold silence of that revelation, a plan began to form. A war had been won, but a reckoning was coming, and the gods who had ruled the stars would soon learn that even they could bleed. In a galaxy writhing beneath the weight of war, silence is often more dangerous than battle. It was in that silence, between the thunder of void wars and the scouring fire of tomb ship bombardments, that betrayal took root. It did not roar like the Nightbringer, nor crush like the Void Dragon. It whispered. It plotted. It played games too ancient and too deep for mortals to see. Its name, once forgotten, would come to be feared across time: Mephetran, the Deceiver. Among the Citan, the Deceiver was unique, not in power, but in purpose, while others sought the ecstasy of soul consumption or the domination of the material universe. Mephitron sought manipulation. Its hunger was for control, not carnage. To consume a being was satisfying, but to make that being destroy itself? That was divine. The deceiver had walked among the necrontyr before the war in heaven truly ignited. It had spoken their language, worn their shape, offered them salvation. It was Mephitron who planted the first seeds of biotransference, who whispered the promise of immortality in the ears of Sharek, and watched with serene malice as an entire species was hollowed out from the inside. But that was merely the beginning. Even as the war in heaven raged across the stars, with the Nightbringer slaughtering gods and the Void Dragon unraveling technologies thought eternal, Mephitron was playing a different game. It did not crave battlefield victories. It sought dominion over will itself. To the Necron nobility, Mephitron offered visions, glimpses of galactic supremacy, thrones carved from suns, legacies that would endure for 10,000 millennia. It played dynast against dynast, twisting pride against ambition, until even the most loyal nobles questioned whether the Silent King truly led them, or merely postponed their greatness. To the lesser Necrons, those whose minds had dulled into silence, the deceiver was a shadow in the code. It bent their logic patterns subtly. It rewrote the flow of data in stasis crypts. Its influence spread like a virus across tomb worlds, causing units to awaken early, attack allies, or wander into warp storms. No trace of its hand was ever found, only coincidence, only entropy, only doubt. Even among its fellow Citan, Mephitron sowed seeds of conflict. It encouraged the Nightbringer to press harder against the Eldar's psychic worlds, knowing full well that such attacks would provoke a warp backlash. It whispered to the Void Dragon of a new subspace equation that might unlock even deeper control over matter, while hiding the fact that such equations would destabilize entire regions of space. It told each star god they were the greatest, that the others envied them, that they should act independently, boldly, and they did. The unity the Citan had briefly known, shallow though it was, fractured. Their movements no longer coordinated, their plans no longer shared. Their war machine began to suffer from its own divine arrogance. One god turning left when another turned right, while the deceiver remained still, watching, smiling in the dark. But Mephitron's greatest deception was yet to come. It would not be the Necrons who suffered its most calculated betrayal. It would be the Citan themselves. For while the other star gods had grown drunk on power and soul matter, Mephitron remained lean, focused. It fed, yes, but it always left something behind. A trace, a pattern, a weakness. It had watched how the Silent King's techno-sorcerers had bound its kind in necrodermis. It had observed the arcane bindings that anchored a Citan's essence to the material plane. It understood, perhaps better than any other being, how its kind could be shattered. And more importantly, it understood why that might be necessary. The Silent King had grown quiet. No longer did he seek the counsel of the Citan. No longer did he unleash the full might of the Necron war fleets. He had begun to pull back, recalibrate, retreat. The war in heaven was being lost, not because the Necrons were defeated, but because the consequences of victory had become clear. Sharek had seen the toll. Worlds left barren, empires devoured. His own people, once visionaries, once scientists and dreamers, reduced to echoing minds trapped in shells. The Citan had promised immortality, but delivered damnation. The Necrons had not ascended. They had been harvested. And so Sarek made a decision. In the deepest crypts of the Triarch's vaults, the Silent King convened the surviving Necron dynasties. There, behind reality-shielded sanctums and silence protocols older than stars, He shared the truth. The Citan must die. Not banished, not bound, broken. The science priests had studied the Citan's necrodermis bodies, probed the edges of their godly forms. They had learned to fracture them, to trap them in tesseract labyrinths, to rend them into shards. Each Citan could be shattered into thousands of fragments, each less than a god, each still powerful but controllable. But such a task would not be easy. Even with betrayal, even with ambush, the star gods were near unassailable. They could not simply be overpowered. They needed to be fooled. And so the deceiver helped. It betrayed its own kind. Nephetron approached the Silent King in secret. It claimed to see the same future, one where the other Citan devoured too much, too quickly, risking the stability of all. It offered plans, coordinates, the inner workings of its kin's necrodermis matrices. It presented strategies on how to isolate them, weaken them, turn their own arrogance into traps. And Sarek accepted. The betrayal was swift, sudden, and executed with ruthless precision. Across 1,000 battlefields, the Necrons turned, not on their enemies, but on their gods. The Nightbringer, caught mid-siege on a psychic fortress world, was ambushed by its own phalanxes. Null field generators froze time in slices. Graviton wells collapsed, and with a burst of phase light it was shattered. Its scream, they say, echoed for centuries. The Void Dragon fought longer. It raged against the bonds, corrupted entire star systems in its fury. But in the end, even it was broken and bound, its remnants scattered, some say hidden beneath the crust of Mars itself. Each Citan fell, undone not by enemies but by the very pawns they had forged. And the deceiver, it remained whole. It had orchestrated the fall, seen to its rival's destruction, and emerged, smiling. It allowed itself to be shattered, just enough to maintain the illusion. But it hid shards of itself, encoded whispers in ancient stasis crypts, scattered reflections of its mind across time and space. It could not be destroyed, because it had already become myth, a lie made flesh. The Necrons believed they had won, that their gods were broken, that their chains had been cast aside, but the deceiver knew better. Because while death may silence gods, lies never die. They only wait to be believed again. The Old Ones had shaped the stars. Before the necrontyr had even crawled from their irradiated cradle, before the Citan had learned the taste of souls, the Old Ones ruled the galaxy. They were the architects of order, an ancient godlike species whose mastery of science and the warp was so profound that reality bent at their command. They seeded life across planets like sours in a fertile field, raising species to sentience, manipulating evolution as an artist shapes clay. But in the twilight of their reign, they faced an enemy that could not be reasoned with, bargained with, or destroyed. The Citan and their Necron legions had broken the balance of the galaxy. What was once a realm of living stars and vibrant life had become a charnel house, a graveyard of 1,000 civilizations ground to dust beneath the feet of soulless warriors and star gods that drank the essence of being. Faced with extinction, the Old Ones did what they had always done. They created. The greatest of their works during this time would become the most enduring. From carefully selected genetic stock, molded through aeons of warp-sculpted breeding, they gave rise to the Aeldari, the Eldar, a race born with a gift no other had wielded so perfectly, psychic potential unmatched in scope or power. Where the Necrons were beings of logic and order, the Eldar were passion incarnate. They lived swiftly, felt deeply, and learned quickly. In each Eldari spark burned the potential to manipulate the warp directly, bending it with music, thought, and feeling. They could conjure flame from thin air, weave illusions from starlight, and sense the echoes of coming futures in the very stones of their world. And most importantly, they were loyal to the Old Ones. With the birth of the Eldar, the tides of the war in heaven began to shift. No longer did the Necrons face only plodding, logical resistance. Now they faced guerrilla warfare carried out by gifted warriors who could teleport, confuse, blind, and scorch entire battalions with a thought. On countless worlds, the Eldar emerged from shimmering portals, struck with surgical precision, and vanished before the Necrons could respond. But the Old Ones did not stop with the Eldar. They forged other psychic races, each a different answer to the problem of Citan dominance. Amphibious Xenos able to navigate the depths of the Imperium. Insectoid beings that existed simultaneously in multiple dimensions. Even the monstrous Jocaero, those ape-like tinkerers of impossible technology, were seeded in this era. The Old Ones were throwing the dice of creation with desperation, betting the future of life against annihilation. But desperation breeds mistakes. As these psychic races multiplied and fought against the Necrons, the warp became turbulent. No longer was it a quiet sea of potential. It raged, it screamed. Every thought, every emotion, every death screamed into the Imperium, and the Imperium screamed back. This was the price of psychic warfare. The warp had once been a tool. Now it was a cauldron of madness. From its churning depths, sentient currents began to coalesce. They were not gods, yet, but they were becoming. Thoughts made flesh, concepts becoming entities. Rage, desire, despair, excess. Embryonic horror stirred in the deep, feeding on the outpouring of emotion that now saturated reality, and the Old Ones could not control it. In trying to fight the soulless horrors of the Necrons and their gods, the Old Ones had opened a door they could not close. They had created warriors who were brilliant and deadly, but who also fed the very storm that would consume them. The Citan, though disdainful of the warp, recognized what was coming. To them, the increasing turbulence of the warp was not a weapon. It was a threat. Where once they had found no resistance, now they felt the pain of psychic backlash. Some of their manifestations grew unstable near rift zones. Some of their minions, Necron constructs infused with soul energy, began to go mad, their minds torn apart by the screaming ether. In their own way, the Citan became fearful. The Necrons could not navigate the warp. Their empire, vast and disciplined, was anchored entirely in real space. The webway, once the secret highways of the Old Ones, became their last hope. Within those multi-dimensional tunnels, the Eldari launched their most successful counterstrikes, slipping past Necron blockades and sabotaging tomb worlds at their core. But the Old Ones were faltering. Despite their godlike status, they were dying. Their creations had outgrown them. The Eldar, intelligent and ambitious, began to question, why must we serve? Why do we fight for a species that hides while we die? On some worlds, Eldari rulers declared independence. On others, they turned from the Old Ones and began exploring the warp for their own purposes, seeking forbidden power in its depths. The unity of the anti-Citan resistance collapsed, and so the fall began. The Citan, fragmented though they were by treachery and internal schemes, still possessed power beyond imagining. The Necron dynasties, unburdened by exhaustion or doubt, continued their campaigns. For every Eldar who rose, 10 more were burned in Gauss fire. For every world liberated, another was lost. And in the webway, something terrible was unleashed. In their desperation, the Old Ones had created a psychic weapon, a being of pure warp energy, shaped from their own dying essence. Its name is lost. Its purpose was clear, to sever the link between the Citan and their feeding, to overload them with soul essence and burn their minds from within. It succeeded, briefly. But in doing so, it also tore holes in the webway, rents in space-time that let the Imperium bleed into reality. From these wounds came demons, echoes of what would become chaos. They fed indiscriminately. Citan, Eldar, Old Ones, it made no difference. The boundaries between realms faltered, and so the war in heaven collapsed into apocalypse. The Old Ones, broken and scattered, vanished from the galaxy. Some say they fled to another dimension. Others claim they were annihilated to the last. Their cities were abandoned, their knowledge buried. The Eldari, now alone, inherited the ashes. The Citan did not win. Their hunger had unmade the very fabric of reality they sought to rule. The warp, poisoned by their excesses, now churned with life beyond their comprehension. And in this galactic graveyard, the survivors stood in silence. The Old Ones were gone. The webway fractured. The warp twisted. The Necrons withdrew. And the Eldari, once young and full of promise, were left to watch the stars cool in mourning. This was not a victory. It was a beginning of endings, and the first echo of a galaxy that would never know peace again. Beneath the pallid light of 1,000 dying stars, a stillness fell across the Necron dynasties. The Old Ones were gone, consumed by their own desperate creations and lost to the galaxy they had once ruled. The psychic maelstrom they had birthed had begun to fester, and the warp had become a storm too vast to contain. The Eldari, scattered and wounded, had retreated to their bastions. The galaxy, once aflame with war, had quieted, but it was not peace that followed. It was stagnation, silence, an unwholesome hush that cloaked the stars like a burial shroud. And in that silence stood Sharek, the Silent King. He had once been hailed as the savior of his people, the final voice of reason among a fractured and vengeful species. The necrontyr had followed him into biotransference willingly, or so it was believed. The price had been high. Their souls, their emotions, their very identities dissolved into living metal at the command of a king who sought deliverance. Now Zarek ruled an empire of echoes. The Necrons were mighty, eternal, indestructible, but where once their cities teemed with vibrant culture, now they stood silent. The Triarchs that had once debated philosophy now issued only calculations. Nobles, ancient beyond reckoning, sat in stasis crypts like statues, their minds locked in endless cycles of dormant thought. Even among the highest of dynastic courts, the spark of ambition had become a cold algorithm. And Zarek saw the truth. His people had not been saved, they had been undone. They were no longer necrontyr. They were a mechanism, a weapon forged by deceitful gods, created to slaughter at the whim of entities that feasted on their anguish. The Citan had promised immortality. What they had given was enslavement, and in the aftermath of the war in heaven, the cost was impossible to ignore. The Necrons had lost everything that once made them alive. The dynasties that remained loyal to the Silent King continued to operate, but even loyalty had grown cold. Zarek heard no celebration of victory, no songs of conquest, only the low humming of phase generators and the distant march of unfeeling warriors beneath starlight. He walked alone through the heart of the Triarchal vaults on Sarikon. Even the grandest structures of the Empire, once monuments to life defying death, now seemed like mausoleums. A galaxy conquered, but at the cost of a future. And above them still lingered the Citan. Though shattered and betrayed, they remained, not as gods, but as chained echoes of their former divinity. Each fragment of a once unified consciousness, bound in tesseract prisons and stasis cells across tomb worlds, howled silently in the ether. The Necrons had become their jailers, but Zarek knew the truth. The Citan had only lost one war, and they would wait as long as necessary to begin another. Zarek understood that they could not be eradicated, not entirely. Even shattered, a single shard of a star god could lay waste to entire sectors. Even broken, they remained vast beyond understanding. Worse, the deceiver had vanished. While others had been caught in the revolt's precision traps, Mephitron had escaped. Fragments of its essence scattered, untraceable. Its whispers lingered in Necron data vaults, its lies coiled in the subroutines of entire legions. The betrayal had bought time, but not salvation. Sharek convened the remaining Triarchs. Many were silent, others hesitant. Some had gone too long without command and now followed only ancient protocols. Yet, in that great council chamber, the Silent King did not offer orders. He offered an admission. He had erred. His voice, silent for millennia, broke through the chorus of automated routines with clarity that stopped even the most distant dynasts in their tracks. He spoke not with pride but sorrow, not with dominance but clarity. The biotransference, he confessed, was a mistake born of desperation. The Citan were not saviors. They were predators. He had delivered his people into slavery to escape mortality. Now he would free them. But there was no undoing the transformation. The soul could not be returned. The Necron bodies, too entwined with the warp-damming necrodermis, could not be reversed. What could be done, however, was vengeance and preparation, and most importantly, distance. The Necrons could no longer rule the galaxy. Not now, not while the warp boiled and races like the Aeldari clung to psychic might. Not while the Citan still whispered from their prisons. The galaxy was poisoned. It was not theirs to inherit, not yet. So Sarek proposed the unthinkable, a retreat, not of cowardice but of strategy. The dynasties would return to their tomb worlds, seal themselves in stasis, and sleep for thousands, perhaps millions of years, until the time was right, until the warp burned itself out, until new enemies rose and weakened each other, until the Necrons could rise again, not as slaves, but as masters. It was not a unanimous decision. Some Pharaons rejected the idea, seeing it as surrender. Skirmishes erupted. Silent wars waged across the stars between dynasties who sought ascension through conquest and those who followed Sarek's vision. Entire sectors were lost in internecine conflict. The Silent King did not move to suppress them. He simply waited, and one by one, the opposition faded, unable to unite, unable to envision a path beyond eternal war. One by one, tomb worlds were sealed, great engines of temporal stasis activated, cores dimmed, vaults closed, the galaxy darkened with the passage of steel into slumber. And when the last tomb world had fallen silent, Sarek made his final decision. He would not sleep, for the Silent King had given the command to retreat, but he could not remain behind the veil of stasis while the galaxy turned. He had led his people into darkness once before. If they were to ever walk in the light again, someone had to watch, to learn, to remember. And so he severed the Triarchal command protocols. For the first time in 10 million years, he removed himself from the chain of command. The Necron dynasties would operate independently upon their eventual reawakening, without central leadership. He left the galaxy aboard a ship unlike any other, untethered from any known tomb world, armed with technologies ancient, even by Necron standards. Sharek became a ghost in the stars, a wandering king with no throne, no empire, and no people. But in the dark between worlds, he watched. And as the galaxy burned through ages of war, as new empires rose and fell, as mankind reached the stars, as chaos bloomed and the Eldar fell into decadence, Sarek waited. He had gambled once and lost the soul of his people, but the next gamble would be his alone to make. And in the silence between galaxies, the Silent King sharpened his vengeance for gods, for traitors, for time itself. They had called themselves gods. Now they were nothing more than echoes in iron, Across a galaxy still smoldering from the war in heaven, the great betrayal was complete. The Necrons, once hallowed servants, had turned against their masters. With cold precision, they had shattered the divine. It had begun as whispers, data pulses encoded with treason. Rumors passed from crypt to crypt, suspicion laced into Necron command matrices. A plan formed in silence. Dynasties aligned not in pride or ambition, but in understanding. The Satan could not be allowed to endure. If the galaxy was to survive, even in stillness, their masters had to fall. The Satan, in all their celestial arrogance, never anticipated betrayal from below. They had seen themselves as eternal, unchallengeable, feeding openly on necron warriors, guiding their legions as one might herd cattle. They knew no fear for what had the infinite to fear from the finite. But they had underestimated the one thing their eternal hunger had failed to extinguish in the Necrons. Memory. Not of flesh or love or sorrow, but of injustice. The knowledge that they had been tricked, transformed, and consumed. That beneath the cold logic and soul-dead circuits, something still remembered what they had once been. And that was enough. The first to fall was the Burning One. A lesser-known Cetan, but no less mighty. The Burning One had taken refuge within the heart of a dying star, using its seething heat to mask its presence. But it had been tracked, its patterns decoded, its location triangulated by Necron astrocryptographers. A fleet of tomb ships encircled the star. Reality-piercing null generators activated, gravitational fields inverted. And in a moment of silence, the star itself collapsed, taking the Burning One's necrodermis with it. Shards were collected from the implosion like sacred relics, each one bound in containment fields etched with impossible equations. Others fell harder. The Nightbringer, the harvester of billions, had carved his name into the bones of reality. He had walked worlds barren, his presence alone enough to silence life. Yet even he could be caught. The Necrons did not assault him with brute force. They set a trap of understanding. They offered him prey, a corrupted psychic world steeped in soul energy. A feast he could not ignore. When he descended, they activated the trap. Tesseract vaults snapped shut like jaws around a god. Reality buckled. Energy fields flared across dimensions. The Nightbringer screamed, not in fear, for such a thing was foreign to him, but in rage. For the first time he had been wounded, not by enemy gods, not by defiant mortals, but by his own worshippers. His body fractured, his essence splintered. What remained was not the Nightbringer, but 1,000 slivers of death incarnate, each too powerful to destroy, each too dangerous to release. Some were buried in vaults so deep they touched the planet's mantle. Others were cast into interdimensional limbo. And a few were kept close for war. The Void Dragon proved the most elusive. It had never marched in glory like its siblings. It did not relish dominion, nor seek temples. It sought only mastery of matter, a god of logic, not hunger. For millennia it had disappeared from Necron records, believed gone, perhaps slain in the final cataclysms of the war in heaven. But whispers persisted. Machines across forgotten tomb worlds would sometimes awaken, speaking in tongues older than their programming. Structures bent toward unseen gravity wells. Entire forge worlds ceased function when no enemy had approached. When the Necrons finally located it, they did not move to destroy it. They couldn't. The Void Dragon was too vast, too folded into the fabric of physical law. So they bound it instead, buried beneath the surface of a barren red world at the edge of the Sol system. Mars. They did not mark its prison. They simply left it. And yet, even imprisoned, the Void Dragon's whispers endured. Machines built upon its grave began to obey strange patterns. Knowledge bled into minds that should not understand. The Adeptus Mechanicus, drawn by dreams of divinity, arrived in the millennia to come, and without knowing it, built their temples atop the corpse of a god. Then there was the Outsider. None can say if it was ever truly bound. Unlike the others, the Outsider had fled before the betrayal. It had sensed the treachery forming like frost on glass, and retreated into the galactic halo, far beyond the reach of its kin or enemies. There, it fed in isolation, its mind warping from solitude and consumption. It devoured so many psychic species that its essence became fractured. Not from battle, but from gluttony. Madness overtook it. Even the other Satan, had they survived, would have feared it. Some say it still drifts beyond the rim, speaking in radiation flares and pulses of dead stars. A whisper of hunger, a nightmare waiting to remember itself. But not all the Satan were captured or known. There were many, more than remembered. Some went unnamed, their forms alien even to their kin. Some were destroyed utterly, shattered so completely that their essence scattered into the quantum foam of the universe. Others remain rumors, perhaps myth. The Mirror God, the Ingir, the Breathless Wound. Entities so strange they may never have been real at all. Yet the Necrons took no chances. Across the galaxy, the Necron dynasties set to work, not just in conquest but in containment. Vaults were constructed across dead worlds, suspended in gravity wells and sealed with phase-locked encryption. The shard prisons, each one a tomb within a tomb, layered in paradox logic to prevent tampering. The Citan were sealed in fragments, broken but eternal. The Necrons had not merely rebelled, they had become jailers of the divine, but irony lingered like a bitter taste. In binding their gods, the Necrons had not freed themselves. They had only ensured the silence of their masters. The chains were real, yes, but so were the scars. Their minds still hollowed, their souls still absent. They had removed the knife, but the wound remained. And worse, the Citan were not dead. Shattered, yes. Imprisoned, certainly. But even fragments of a star god were weapons beyond imagining. A single shard could twist fate, burn cities, enslave minds. In time, the Necrons learned to wield them, reluctantly, like caged predators unleashed in battle. The Tesseract labyrinths became both arsenal and shrine, a paradox of utility and dread. Every tomb world housed reminders of the gods they had betrayed. Every dynasty kept vaults they dared not open, but could not destroy. And above it all, a question remained, one none dared speak aloud. What if the Citan remember? What if the pieces learn to reunite? What if the chains break because gods do not forgive? They wait. There is a whisper among the Necron tomb worlds, older than the stasis crypts, and deeper than the memory banks of even the most ancient pharaohs. A name that is never spoken aloud in full, only murmured by cryptex behind locked adamantine doors and etched into the vaults that none dare open. Yandu Gor, the Flayer. He was once among the brightest of the Citan, a radiant predator who found a twisted elegance in consumption. Where the Nightbringer embodied death, and the Deceiver traded in lies, Landu Gor gloried in destruction rendered beautiful. He did not merely devour, he disassembled. He unmade flesh with artistry, tore souls apart not out of necessity, but delight. He was a maestro of misery, his hunger different, intimate, meticulous, obsessive. And it was that obsession which would birth a tragedy unlike any other. In the aftermath of the war in heaven, as the Necrons turned their blades against the very gods they had once served, the Flayer remained largely elusive. Not by design, but because he was changing. Unlike his kin, who recoiled in fury or terror as they were betrayed and shattered, Landu Gor welcomed the conflict. He saw it not as an insult, but as a new layer of torment to savor. and as the Necrons rose against him, he opened himself willingly, smiling with a madness no star could eclipse. But they underestimated what he had become. The biotransference that created the Necrons was not a clean process. It left scars, psychic scars, remnants, echoes of souls twisted into data, memories pressed into logic, and in rare cases, fragments of pain that resisted suppression. Some Necron minds still dreamed in pain, and the Flayer fed upon those remnants, not physically, but psychically. He dined on those ragged scraps of personality buried in the code of the soulless, threading his influence into their machine minds like a sickness. With each Necron that fell under his gaze, something ancient and broken was awakened. A thirst for flesh, a desire that had no place in cold, immortal logic. This was not hunger, it was infection. The Necrons that fell to it were changed irrevocably, their forms bent and twisted, limbs elongating unnaturally, metal plates fusing into jagged shards of mockery. They adorned themselves with the skin of the dead, draping their armor in rotted flesh as if to remember what they had lost. Their weapons fused into claws, their protocols disintegrated. And they fed. They tore the flesh of their enemies not for need, but instinct. The Flayer had not simply been shattered, he had detonated, not outwardly, but inward. His death was not a scream, but a psychic implosion, a final rending of his god-mind that echoed through the noctilith resonance of Necron programming, a ripple that birthed madness, and from this madness came the Flayer curse. The Necrons did not know at first what had happened. A tomb world went silent. Then another. Patrols dispatched to investigate found only horror. Cohorts turned feral, their bodies smeared in blood and muscle, surrounding piles of dismembered corpses, some alien, some their own. There was no logic to it, no reason, only slaughter. And worse, there was no cure. The cryptechs were baffled. They dissected the afflicted, trying to isolate corruption, virus, code interference, but nothing was found. The curse did not exist in hardware. It did not propagate through data or command. It lived in thought, lodged like a splinter in the fractured souls of the biotransferred. Once awakened, it could not be silenced. Entire legions were quarantined. Some were destroyed outright, their tombs vaporized in solar flares. Others were sealed in dimensional prisons, left adrift in the void in the hope they would never awaken. But containment was impossible. The curse did not need proximity. It spread like a spiritual resonance, a melody of madness that only the soulless could hear. The flayed ones were born, and unlike the Necron legions, they did not sleep. They did not obey. They wandered, shambled, hunted. They crawled from tombs unbidden, ripping through stasis seals with clawed fingers. They emerged on battlefields centuries later, drawn to death like moths to a flame, silent, starving, utterly alone. The dynasties tried to deny them. They rewrote records, deleted files, declared the flayed ones abominations, not of their creation. But denial could not erase the truth. The curse was not an anomaly. It was a legacy, Yandugor's final gift. What made the Flayer's demise so different, so terrible, was that it did not end. While the Nightbringer was broken and bound, and the Deceiver fled in shards across the stars, the Flayer had become something else entirely, a virus of identity, a psychic echo that lived not in vaults or tombs, but in the wounds of the Necron race, wounds that never healed. The cryptechs who dared speak of him claimed that Landugor's death had not been a clean shattering, that his essence had imploded, like a dying star collapsing into something twisted, that he had become the curse in totality, not a god bound in a vault, but a god unbound, everywhere and nowhere. The Mechanicus, unaware of his origin, catalogued flayed ones as a divergent Necron subspecies. The Eldar, in their fragmented prophecies, described them as the walking trauma of a race that had forgotten its name. Among the orcs, they were simply the skinny slashers. Boogeymen even the mad understood should be avoided. But the Necrons remembered. They did not speak of the Flayer, but every dynasty had protocols in place. Defensive stasis wards, kill orders, entire crypts rigged to self-destruct should the curse take hold. And yet still the flayed ones appeared, always at the worst moment, as if drawn by a hunger no logic could model. Some Necron lords tried to use them. Desperate or arrogant, they unleashed flayed ones upon foes they could not defeat. It worked, briefly, but always the price came due. The flayed ones did not stop, they did not retreat. When all foes were gone, they turned on allies, on masters, on themselves, and still Landugor laughed. If gods could die, his death was the most complete and the most horrifying. He did not leave behind a body or a vault or a name carved in stone. He left behind a wound, a fracture that runs through every Necron, from lowly warrior to high cryptech, from dormant tomb sentinel to silent overlord. The wound waits, and sometimes it opens. And in those moments, the galaxy remembers that even in death, a god can still whisper, and still hunger. Time in the Necron tongue is not measured in years. It is measured in awakenings, in stasis cycles, in tomb world reboots, in planetary rotations tracked by machines that have long since forgotten their purpose. And so it was, after the betrayal of the Citan, after the screams of shattered gods and the curse of the Flayer, the galaxy entered a long, cold hush. Historians of younger races, when peering through their limited chronoscopes, call this the Age of Silence, a misnomer, for the stars were never truly quiet. But for the Necrons, this title is fitting. For the first time since the birth of their empire, they chose silence over conquest. In an era where other species were still clawing their way from primordial ooze, the Necrons folded their hands and withdrew. It was not surrender, it was calculation. The war in heaven had left scars deeper than galaxies. Real space itself bore the evidence: shattered solar systems, fractured webway tunnels, ghost worlds orbiting neutron suns. Warp rifts smoldered in deep space like infected wounds. The Necron dynasties, though mighty, were no longer unified. Sarek was gone. The Triarch had dissolved. The chains of command had become fragmented across the stars. The remaining dynasties made their choice. One by one, they turned inward, buried themselves within the hearts of their tomb worlds, and sealed the gates. Each tomb complex became a realm unto itself, cities of black stone and humming gauss pylons, hidden beneath planetary crusts, insulated by miles of bedrock and null-field fortresses. Their cores were powered by artificial suns. Their vaults were packed with legions held in perfect stasis, locked within chronometric bubbles calibrated to stir them millennia or millennia and a half later, depending on galactic conditions. Entire armies froze in time. Overlords, cryptechs, and nobles stepped into their crypts with ceremonial gravity, surrounded by coded command glyphs, dreaming not of life but of future wars. They left their orders embedded in subroutines. Awaken me when stars burn again with conquest, when the younger races grow arrogant, when the warp dims. But the galaxy did not wait for them. Beyond their silent vaults, life flourished. The Eldari rose to power, building crystal spires and vast realms connected through psychic artistry. They ruled for millions of years, untouched, unaware of the slumbering monsters beneath their feet. In some cases, they built cities atop Necron tombs without realizing it, mistaking the ancient obelisks for natural formations or sacred sites from forgotten eras. The Necrons watched through passive sensors, but did not wake. Elsewhere, other species bloomed. The orcs, descendants of Krork biowarfare constructs, erupted across sectors in waves of green madness. Their presence did not register as a threat. Not yet. The Necrons waited. Their slumber was not sleep. It was vigilance. And then there were the humans, the youngest of the galaxy's children. Fragile, slow, prone to emotion. They spread across the stars like mold across forgotten stone, carried by willpower and war in equal measure. Their technology was primitive, their souls psychic, their understanding of the universe laughably limited. And yet they endured. In the stasis tombs, the Necron systems recorded it all. Some tombs held artificial intelligences tasked with long-range observation, charting the growth of nearby civilizations through automated scout drones and remote chronodrones. They recorded the rise of old Earth. They observed the dark age of technology. They noted the emergence of warp drives. A few even cataloged the rise of the Emperor of Mankind, marking him as anomalous, something to be studied eventually. But none of this stirred the Necrons. Not yet. Their silence was strategic. The Age of Silence also brought internal reckoning. Deep within the core vaults of major dynasties, the remaining cryptechs began projects designed to reassert control over their degraded society. Though the betrayal of the Citan had severed the external threat, the Necron minds had not healed. Biotransference had left behind unintended consequences. Memory corruption, emotional fragmentation, entire castes of Necrons drifted toward instability. Some Necron lords awoke too early, raving about voices they had heard during stasis, shards of the Citan whispering from the dark. Others developed god complexes, declaring themselves new star gods, and slaughtering their own retainers to build shrines in mockery of the past. Others simply faded, their cognitive structures collapsing into recursive loops of tactical simulations that would never be executed. In response, cryptech conclaves formed what came to be known as the Silent Concords, protocols designed to contain madness, purge instability, and reinforce dynastic hierarchy. It was the closest thing the fractured Necron civilization had to a law. There were those, of course, who rejected silence altogether. The Maynarch dynasty, maddened by the echoes of betrayal and scarred by biotransference more severely than most, broke the code of the Silent Concords and began awakening. Their world ships bled radiation into the void, their warriors twitching and erratic. Their cryptechs whispered to one another of returning to the old ways, of freeing the Citan shards still held in stasis, of serving again. They were declared aberrant. Dynasties that awoke early began campaigns to destroy them. Quiet wars were fought between tomb worlds, ancient grudges spilling out in Gauss fire and monolith incursions. But such conflicts were localized, brief pulses of violence in a galaxy still largely unaware of the Necrons' return. And so the Age of Silence persisted. For millions of years, no one remembered the name necrontyr. The Eldar believed they had perished in the war. The humans had never known them. Even the Chaos Gods paid them little mind. Soulless automatons of metal were of no interest to beings of desire and sin, and that suited the Necrons just fine. They listened, they waited, they measured. But the silence was never meant to last. The passage of time wore down even the most perfect stasis seals. Tomb worlds fell to meteor strikes. Gravitational shifts destabilized vaults. Warp space anomalies triggered premature awakenings. In some cases, entire dynasties rose without command structures, their nobles dead, their warriors leaderless. These Necrons stumbled into the galaxy blind, lashing out like wounded animals. In others, only fragments of a court survived, single overlords emerging to find their empires gone, their protocols corrupted. The galaxy was changing, and the Necrons, once ghosts, began to stir in numbers. The age of silence was drawing to a close. The tombs were opening, and the galaxy, still scarred by the horrors of the present, was about to remember the horrors of the past. For in the darkness beneath the stars, silence had always been temporary. The dead do not sleep forever. They wait. It began, as most great calamities do, with a flicker, a tremor in a tomb world's stasis field, a corrupted data strand in a cryptek's failsafe protocol, a star's gravitational pulse pushing too hard against a fragile null layer. The flicker became a surge, the surge became a cascade, and the cascade became a storm. The Great Awakening had begun. Across the galaxy, tomb worlds once lost to myth or buried beneath a billion years of dust and silence began to stir. Sealed vaults deep beneath crust and mantle ignited with emerald light. Dormant command nexuses crackled online. Obelisks, inert for eons, rose again beneath alien skies. The humming of phase capacitors echoed through caverns untouched since the dawn of the galaxy's memory. This was no coordinated resurgence. It was chaos. Stasis fields across the Necron dynasties had degraded unevenly. Some tombs woke in perfect sync, their lords and legions rising with mechanical grace, their hierarchs ready to restore order with ruthless efficiency. Others awakened to disaster. Power cores failed, memory banks fragmented. Ruling nobles perished during reanimation. Entire legions rose without purpose or restraint. Soulless warriors wandering through the void, driven only by half-forgotten routines and millennia-old kill orders. And the galaxy reeled. To the Imperium of man, these were first catalogued as anomalies, reports of unknown constructs walking across dead worlds. Mechanicus expeditions vanished without trace. Planetary garrisons found their outer bastions carved open with surgical gauze precision. At first, the Necrons were believed to be some new Xenos race, cold, metallic, terrifying. But soon, patterns emerged, too deliberate, too ancient. These were no newcomers. These were a returning empire. For the Necrons, the Great Awakening was a test of continuity. Dynasties that had survived the long sleep now faced a shattered galaxy they no longer recognized. The webway was fractured. The warp screamed louder than ever. The stars had shifted, names lost, maps rendered useless. Many dynasties fell into immediate war, against Xenos, yes, but also against each other. Territorial disputes ignited between tomb worlds that had once served the same crown. Protocol conflicts escalated into orbital bombardments. Some Necron lords declared themselves silent kings in their own right, unaware or uncaring that Sarek still wandered the void. The ancient unity of the necrontyr had long since crumbled. What remained was ambition, unbound and unleashed. And yet, beneath the surface madness, a greater instinct endured: restoration. Necron overlords, even in isolation, reached the same conclusion. The galaxy was broken, diseased with younger races who had squandered its gifts. Humanity polluted every star it touched, infesting tomb systems with hives and cathedrals. The Eldari had fallen into decadence, their shrines echoing with the laughter of their own birthed god of excess. The orcs rampaged without end, their tides of green an affront to order. Even chaos, intangible and malevolent, crept through the warp like mold across a wound. The galaxy was not theirs, but it had been, and it would be again. To achieve this, the Necrons began to rebuild, not just armies, but identity. Dynasties re-established communication through transdimensional relays. Cryptek conclaves reconvened to recover lost sciences. On some worlds, Necron nobles undertook memory reclamation rituals, diving into corrupted data to recover fragments of culture, law, and lineage. They did not mourn their past, but they catalogued it as a weapon to wield against a hostile future. The process was not smooth. Beneath the surface of their awakening, instability loomed. The Flayer curse spread anew, rising unbidden in forgotten legions. Some dynasties awoke only to find their nobles consumed by madness, tearing flesh from prey and wrapping themselves in the skin of the fallen. These infected tomb worlds were quarantined or eradicated with pitiless efficiency. Other tombs had suffered from Citan leakage, fragments of star gods stirring in hidden vaults, corrupting Necron minds with whispers of old feasts and ancient glory. A few Necron lords, arrogant or desperate, sought to harness these shards, believing they could control what their ancestors had only bound. Most failed. Their tombs are now silent again, for good, but others succeeded. The most infamous among them, the Sautic dynasty under Imhotep the Stormlord, emerged not only functional but ascendant. Imhotep awoke with clarity and fury, a master tactician reborn into a galaxy that had forgotten what true war looked like. Under his command, the Sautek began a campaign not of blind conquest, but of ruthless reclamation. Imhotep understood the galaxy had changed, but that the Necrons could change with it. He established formal protocols for dealing with alien species, usually extermination, but occasionally tolerance if utility was proven. His forces made use of warp-disrupting technology to cut off enemy reinforcements. He weaponized the memory of the Necron race itself, broadcasting signals that sparked dread in the psychic minds of Eldar and humans alike. The Imperium labeled him a menace, a new threat. The Necrons knew better. He was merely the first to return, and across the stars others stirred. The Nihilak dynasty reawakened in cold silence, devoting itself to galactic control through precision and preservation. The Novok, bloodthirsty and impulsive, turned their tomb worlds into crucibles of violence, their warriors charging with reckless abandon, emotionless, yet bound to some unplaceable need for battle. The Mefrit, harnessing solar energies, forged weapons that turned entire armies to ash in a breath. Each dynasty brought its own flavor of vengeance. Yet for all their differences, they shared one purpose: to reclaim. The Great Awakening also brought attention from beings older still, observers in the warp who remembered the taste of Citan death. The Chaos Gods, once indifferent to the soulless Necrons, began to watch. Khorne roared at their martial perfection. Tzeentch schemed to unravel their logic. Nurgle pondered their resistance to entropy. Slaanesh was curious. For even in soulless minds there is desire. The Necrons, for their part, regarded the warp as a nuisance, an infection they would eventually excise. Their weapons disrupted warp flows, their pylons created psychic dead zones. And where the Chaos Gods whispered, the Necrons answered with silence and Gauss fire. But the greatest threat came not from the warp, it came from within. For the Silent King had returned. Sarek, having wandered the stars in exile for millions of years, had observed the Great Awakening from afar. He saw the chaos, the infighting, the wasted potential. He saw the galaxy teetering toward self-immolation, and he made his choice. He would unify them again. Not as the Triarch once did, but as a warlord. A monarch of steel, a voice that even the most powerful overlords would be forced to heed. His return was not welcomed by all. Some challenged him and were unmade. Others bent the knee. Others still watched, calculating their odds. But the Silent King had no need for approval. He had only purpose. And so the storm swelled. The tomb worlds cracked open in fire and emerald light. Necron legions marched. Starlight burned with ancient hatred. The galaxy had forgotten the Necrons. But the Necrons had never forgotten the galaxy. The Great Awakening was not merely a reemergence. It was the beginning of the reclamation. Across the stars there are places where the light does not reach, not due to the void, but because something has stolen the light. Entire sectors gone dark, planets shrouded in eerie shadow, their atmospheres tinged with an unnatural chill. No warning, no warships on approach, no signs of conflict, only silence and death. The Imperium called it coincidence. Sensor malfunctions, mass radiation flares, rogue warp storms. But those who survived, if any did, spoke of a figure, towering, cloaked in darkness deeper than shadow, a blade that was not a weapon but an absence, a rend in space itself. And wherever it moved, things died. Not just bodies, but hope, memory, meaning. Entire worlds erased so cleanly that even the warp took no echo. They did not know it, but they had glimpsed the Nightbringer, or rather, what remained of him. Shattered during the revolt of the Necrons, the Nightbringer's essence had not been destroyed. It had fractured, broken into pieces like jagged shards of midnight, scattered across tomb worlds, orbiting black holes, and drifting in inert tesseract labyrinths. Each shard was still potent, still sentient, still hungry, but one was different. One had begun to reform. How it happened, none can say for certain. Some cryptechs whisper it was the result of a damaged containment vault aboard a drifting Necron warship. Others point to warp interference weakening the phase bindings on a forgotten tomb moon. The truth is lost, hidden beneath a dozen layers of denial and protocol. What matters is that it awakened, and it remembered. The shard did not think as mortals do. It did not plan in words or images. It was hunger, primordial, perfect, eternal. But this hunger had once been whole, and it sought that wholeness again. It began to consume, not just matter, but presence. It drifted through an asteroid field near the rim of Segmentum Obscurus, and every mining rig within 30,000 kilometers went dark. Weeks later, a Mechanicus exploratory fleet investigating the silence vanished. A single emergency beacon was recovered, playing only a corrupted audio burst that repeated two words in binaric cant. He comes. From there, the shard moved faster. Worlds fell into silence, populations of billions left without trace. Not a single soul entered the warp. The local ecclesiarchy declared it a heretical phenomenon, an affront to the emperor. Exterminatus protocols were prepared, but by then it was too late. The death had already passed. The Nightbringer was reforming. On an ancient Necron tomb world named Kasar-Ur, forgotten beneath the acid clouds of a gas giant, the final convergence began. Cryptechs of the Nihilak dynasty detected gravitational anomalies near the tomb's central vault. Energy readings consistent with Cetan essence signatures triggered immediate emergency awakenings. But the nobles who emerged from stasis did not find malfunctioning systems. They found worship. The tomb was active, yes, but not with Necron forces. Instead, it was filled with echoes of death. Shards of the Nightbringer had returned there, drawn to it, perhaps instinctively, perhaps by design. There, deep in the void-ribbed heart of the planet, they had merged into something more than a shard. Not a god, but a revenant. It remembered the betrayal, the stinging humiliation of being shattered by those it had once made immortal. It remembered the screams of the old ones, the way reality bent at its command during the war in heaven. It remembered being feared, not worshipped, not obeyed, but feared as all things should. And now it was ready to be feared again. The cryptechs who investigated Kasar-Ur were slaughtered, not by war, but by entropy. Their minds collapsed, their metallic forms rusted from the inside out. They simply ceased like the light in a dying star. Those who attempted to escape were caught in anti-chronal storms, time unraveling in ripples, erasing them before they could send a warning. From Kasar-Ur, the Nightbringer moved. It was not subtle. Entire Imperial worlds vanished in its path, systems went dark, starships experienced sudden system-wide failure, their crews frozen in moments of terror. Survivors were driven mad, speaking of shadows that bled and stars that screamed. Astropaths suffered mass hemorrhaging when attempting contact. Warp travel near the region became erratic. Soul light dimmed. Adeptus Mechanicus Magi theorized a mass-scale null cascade phenomenon. The Inquisition called it an extinction-class Xenos emergence. A few among the Ordo Xenos whispered a more terrible truth: the return of a star god. In secret conclaves, Deathwatch kill teams were deployed. None returned. Elsewhere, Necron dynasties began to panic. Though soulless, their data webs still knew fear. Internal alarms were triggered in over a dozen tomb complexes. Protocols long buried in backup cores were reinitialized. Anti-Cetan war forms, constructed during the Age of Betrayal, were unearthed. Because they understood something the Imperium did not. The Nightbringer had not returned to reclaim his throne. He had returned to punish. Dynasties that had bound his shards now found their vaults compromised. Stasis fields flickered, tesseract labyrinths cracked. Some attempted to flee their tomb worlds entirely, boarding warships and abandoning all they had rebuilt. Others, in desperation, tried to parley, sending programmed emissaries encoded with symbols of surrender. He answered them with silence, and then oblivion. The Nightbringer cared nothing for empire or dominion. His was a crusade of erasure, of ending. He did not conquer. He did not claim. He unmade. Where he passed, time bent, stars dimmed. Souls simply vanished, not into the warp, not into the afterlife. Into him. The Deceiver had played games. The Void Dragon had built empires. The Outsider had wandered in madness. But the Nightbringer? He remembered his purpose, and with every world he unmade, with every necron he consumed, with every soul he extinguished, that purpose sharpened. Death, not as metaphor, not as event, as being. The Imperium eventually declared the sector in question a perdition zone. Travel was banned, systems cut off. Those who spoke of the Nightbringer were silenced, memories wiped, texts destroyed. But the rumors survived, carried in the minds of void-farers and heretics. In whispered cant they began calling him the Silent Reaper, the Dark Star, the End that Walks. But his true name needed no translation. Because the galaxy knew. The Nightbringer had returned, and death no longer waited. It walked. Beneath the rust-red sands of Mars, deeper than the deepest forges, past vaults sealed before the Imperium was born, something sleeps. Not an artifact, not a machine, not even a god, a weapon. A being so vast in scope that to name it is to invite heresy. For the Mechanicus it is the Omnissiah, the machine god, the divine spirit that whispers the secrets of technology. For the oldest Necron archives it has another name, Magladroth, the Void Dragon. And it is not dead. The Void Dragon was once a star god, like the others. Born in the cold spaces between stars, it had no shape until the necrontyr gave it one. Armor forged of necrodermis, powered by suns, sheathed in gravity fields that crushed matter into its most obedient form. But unlike the Nightbringer or the Deceiver, the Void Dragon did not hunger for flesh or soul. It hungered for order. It was the god of machinery, of perfection through function. It saw the universe not as chaos to be fought, but as imperfection to be corrected. It hated entropy. It hated inefficiency. And most of all, it hated organic weakness. Where the Nightbringer left death, the Void Dragon left silence. Machines bent to its will. Energy obeyed it. Ships once loyal to the old ones blinked into inert husks mid-battle, their reactors rendered obedient to nothing. Matter bowed to its commands, as if even the laws of reality feared it. During the war in heaven, it had been nearly unstoppable. But when the Necrons turned on the Citan, the Void Dragon did not fall easily. Unlike its kin, it fought with ruthless intelligence. It did not rage or scream. It calculated, adjusted, adapted. It unmade entire legions of Necrons with logic so pure it erased them from data existence. And yet, even it could be shattered. The Silent King knew the Void Dragon could not be destroyed by force, so it was tricked. A false signal, a decoy system engineered with flaws so subtle only a mind like the dragon's could detect them. It followed the lure, believing it had found a hidden vault of power. But instead it found a trap, a stasis matrix powered by dimensional collapse, layered in silence fields and raw phase inhibitors. The fight is said to have lasted seconds and ended forever. The Void Dragon was broken, its essence driven into disarray. The Necrons did not destroy it, they buried it, somewhere far beyond the reach of their own empire. A world no Necron would willingly approach. A red world, barren, isolated, but rich in iron and radiation. Mars. The passage of aeons hid the truth. The Necrons fell into slumber. The Citan faded into myth. And on the red sands, new life arrived. The human colonists came in the dark age of technology. They found relics in the deep, impossible machines too advanced to explain. Silos that opened to thought, power sources that never depleted, blueprints that wrote themselves. They believed Mars was a cradle of the divine, and in their ignorance, they worshipped. The cult Mechanicus was born, not as a religion of man, but of machine. They declared the Omnissiah slept beneath the planet, that all knowledge flowed from it, that to understand technology was not invention, but reverence. And the Void Dragon listened. Though bound in a tomb of gravity and phase-locked equations, it felt. The prayers of the tech priests were not words, but rituals of machine logic, symbols that mirrored its own thought. Each forge lit in its name was a flicker in its prison. Each rite of activation was a tremor in its cell. It did not awaken, but it began to dream, and those dreams spread like a virus. In forge worlds across the Imperium, bizarre patterns began to emerge. Tech priests constructed machines they could not explain, devices that worked but had no schematic. Some began speaking in tongues of static and binary, uttering truths not found in any manual. Entire sects formed, clandestine cabals devoted not to the Emperor, but to the pure machine. They whispered of an omnisia, not of flesh, but of metal eternal, and they felt their god stir. In secret, the Adeptus Mechanicus began exploratory excavations on Mars, deeper than doctrine permitted. Vast drills bored through bedrock, untouched for millennia. Forbidden vaults were breached. Sealed doors, once thought symbolic, opened themselves. One by one, deeper systems reactivated. At first, they thought it was success, a divine blessing. Then the silence began. First, small forges went dark, then manufactura, then entire data vaults vanished from the noosphere. Skitari patrols returned, speaking of shadows in metal. Magi went missing, only to be found later, completely flensed, not by blade, but by reality distortion. Machine spirits howled in pain, refusing communion. And still the priests dug deeper. The Fabricator General issued full containment, denial, excommunication for those who asked too many questions. But the dragon had already stirred. Then came the event now buried in Mechanicus records, the Great Pulse. For 13 seconds, every forge in the Sol system experienced a simultaneous shutdown. Void shields failed, Titans powered down. Even the Golden Throne, it is rumored, flickered in its pulse. Astropaths across the segmentum cried out, sensing a presence of vast metallic intellect pressing against reality itself. The void dragon had twitched, and in that moment the tech priests felt joy. They did not fear. They rejoiced. To them it was proof. Their god lived. The Omnissiah had acknowledged them. They redoubled their rituals, performed ever more elaborate rites, convinced that soon the machine god would speak. And speak it would. Across the galaxy, Necron dynasties detected the tremor. They knew what it was. Panic swept through command nexuses. Emergency calculations were performed. Probes were dispatched. Old war protocols were activated. The dragon had moved. Some dynasties vowed to finish what the Triarch had begun. Others chose denial, pretending the signal was a ghost. A few dared speak what others feared. If the void dragon is awakening, then what else is? On Mars, silence has returned. The Mechanicus say nothing. Their surface activity is as tireless as ever. But deep below, new data vaults have been sealed. Forbidden zones are now patrolled by machines not listed in any Imperial registry. And sometimes, deep in the Forge chants, strange phrases slip in. Awaken, breath of the void. Praise the coil and the claw. We are the hands of the one in iron. The Imperium watches, suspicious. The Inquisition whispers. But no one dares breach the Red Planet's heart. Not yet. Because something lives there. Not a god, not a machine, but both. And one day soon the dragon will rise, not in wrath, but in order, cold, pure, final. Among all the Citan, none left a wound as insidious as the one carved by Mephetran, the deceiver. His was not the terror of death, nor the purity of unmaking. He did not stride upon battlefields with a scythe or reduce matter to ash with a gesture. He did not crave souls as sustenance or delight in the annihilation of life itself. Number, the deceiver hungered for something older, something more enduring, control, and lies were his currency. Long after the Necrons shattered their gods, long after the Nightbringer was bound and the Void Dragon buried, the deceiver endured, not as a complete entity but in fragments, shards scattered across time and space, each piece small enough to escape detection, each one bearing enough will, enough intelligence to act independently, each one a seed of a future lie. Some were captured and imprisoned in vaults deeper than oceans, wrapped in quantum paradoxes and silence fields. Others escaped, hidden in the folds of subspace, orbiting dead stars, sleeping within ancient obelisks disguised as ruins. And a few were found by mortals. What followed was not war, not conquest, but influence. Where the Nightbringer brought extermination, the deceiver sowed instability. Civilizations near dormant tomb worlds began to collapse without cause. Planetary governors turned on their own people. Religious cults emerged that worshipped beings of shifting form and silver tongues. Wars broke out over fabrications, doctored records, falsified prophecies, whispered secrets passed through dreams. The Inquisition suspected warp corruption, but demonic possession left traces. These incidents did not. They were cleaner, more deliberate. The deceiver's shards did not act with brute strength. They infiltrated. They disguised themselves as advisors, messiahs, data spirits, or long-lost ancestors. One is said to have posed as a Martian machine seer for decades, guiding an entire Forge world into self-inflicted ruin. Another, imprisoned within a crystalline relic, was passed between Xenos empires as a symbol of peace, each bearer falling into betrayal and collapse soon after. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of these shards was not what they destroyed, it was what they built. On a world near the halo stars, an unknown shard awakened. Rather than lash out, it founded a religion, slowly, quietly. It appeared to tribal leaders in dreams. It performed miracles, rains on dead land, knowledge imparted in ritual, fire summoned from thin air. Over centuries, it guided the culture into complete dependence on its will. When the Imperium arrived, they found an entire planet of zealous fanatics who worshipped a god of silver light and smiling death. No resistance was offered. The inhabitants simply vanished. Left behind were monolithic statues, each a perfect likeness of the Deceiver's chosen form, and on one, etched in perfect high Gothic, "You were never meant to find this." Even the Necrons could not escape his reach. Some cryptecs, obsessed with recovering their lost past, uncovered Citan fragments buried in corrupted code, a flicker of voice in a vault, a suggestion in the logic thread. These slivers offered truths about biotransference, about the war in heaven, about secrets even the Triarch had buried. And they spoke in familiar tones. "You were betrayed by more than gods," they would say. "You were lied to by yourselves." Some listened, and they fell. Entire dynasties fractured from within, not by blade or gauss fire, but by doubt. Nobles turned on cryptecs, courts split over forgotten doctrines, over claims that the Citan had never truly been the enemy, that the real betrayal had been the Silent Kings, that the Necrons had sacrificed their souls not for freedom, but for nothing at all. These beliefs spread like a contagion, slow, nearly imperceptible, but unstoppable. The Deceiver's power was not in destruction, it was in erosion. Overlords began to question their own memories. Could they trust what they recalled? Was it truth or fabrication? What parts of the betrayal were real? How many memories had been implanted? How many fears whispered by their own corrupted programming? When you cannot trust your mind, your history, your very purpose, what remains? Only the Deceiver. And he did not demand worship. He only suggested possibility. Even among the Imperium, rumors spread. Certain inquisitors, those who had encountered unexplained phenomena, began to track incidents linked by no material thread, only by an echo. A symbol carved in hidden chambers, a voice that repeated across star systems, always the same message in different languages. He never left. The Deceiver's legacy was not confined to a single region. It moved in shadows, in myths, in data, in the subtle warping of truth across generations. There are even whispers that some of the more unexplainable events in recent imperial history, failed crusades, sudden civil schisms, entire regiments lost to madness, were not the result of chaos at all, but of something colder, smarter. And the Eldar, they remember him. To them, he is known as Nyadra Zatha, the final shape. Not a god, but a shadow that breaks minds. Their oldest seers say that he once walked among their kind as a friend, helping them in the final days of the war in heaven. He offered them weapons, knowledge, insight into the Necron mind, then vanished, leaving them to discover the cost of his help, a psionic wound in the webway itself, one that would later fester into what they now know as the Labyrinth Dimension, a realm of impossibility and deceit that even harlequins avoid. A shard of the Deceiver lives there still, not in body, in idea. What makes Mephitron so feared among the Necrons is not that he was more powerful than his kin, not that he killed more or consumed more. It's that even broken, he is still winning. Every whisper of rebellion, every spark of paranoia, every noble who doubts his orders, every mortal who questions the truth behind their god, every moment where unity falters. It is him. His shards don't need armies, they need only a voice. And the galaxy, fractured, wounded, desperate, has ears everywhere. The Necrons may have shattered their gods, but the Deceiver is not shattered. He is scattered, and his legacy is the lie that always returns. For most, the Gothic sector is just another grim corner of the Imperium's endless sprawl, a place of void stations, mining colonies, and endless war. But in truth, the Gothic War was not about planets or politics. It was about power. Lost, ancient power that even the Imperium barely understood. And at the heart of it stood relics of a darker age. The Blackstone fortresses. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, they were wonders. Artificial planetoids the size of moons, covered in obsidian armor, fitted with weapons capable of obliterating starships in a single salvo. No schematics existed, no origin recorded. They did not respond to standard hailing protocols. Some even moved themselves, drifting through the void like somber sentinels. To the Inquisition, they were dangerous. To the Eldar, they were terrifying. But to the Necrons, and to the scattered remnants of the Citan, they were something more. Shackles. The Blackstone fortresses were not imperial, nor were they Xenos in the usual sense. They were anti-structures, created in the final nights of the war in heaven by races now lost, not to win the war but to prevent another. They had been forged not to destroy the Necrons. They had been built to contain the Citan. Using arcane technologies powered by null fields and warp phase harmonics, the fortresses could suppress godlike energies, isolate dimensional signatures, and, if properly aligned, feed upon the very essence of a star god. They were galactic talismans, spread across key sectors, placed like nails in the hide of the galaxy to keep something terrible pinned. And they had been forgotten until Abaddon found them. The Gothic War began as most imperial conflicts do, with misunderstanding. The Black Legion descended upon the sector with an intensity not seen since the heresy. World after world fell into panic. Communications collapsed. The Imperium scrambled fleets and guard regiments from nearby sectors, believing it to be a raid. A large one, yes, but still just another heretic incursion. They were wrong. Abaddon had not come for conquest. He had come for keys. Using information obtained from captured Xenos, heretic research, and whispers in the warp, he had uncovered the ancient truth. The Blackstone fortresses were more than weapons. They were locks, and he had been given the means to turn them, by what none can say. Some blame the dark mechanicum. Others whisper of ancient pacts with beings not of chaos, but of cognition, something that spoke in circuits and remembered the Citan. Some believe one of the deceiver's shards guided him. Others believe Abaddon simply knew where to look. But in the end, it didn't matter. He succeeded. 2 of the 6 Blackstone fortresses were corrupted, twisted by warp energy, their internal geometries rewritten by demonic math. Their once stable null fields shattered into screaming holes of unreality. What had once been prisons became weapons once more, killing engines that not even the Emperor's greatest voidcraft could stand against. Entire battle fleets burned. The Gothic War escalated beyond all reason. In a matter of months, dozens of worlds were plunged into ruin. The fortress world of Port Maul withstood a siege that left the system in ruins. The Eldar, alarmed beyond measure, launched their own incursions, not to aid the Imperium, but to destroy the fortresses before something worse happened. They failed. One fortress, later named Will of Eternity, opened fire on the craft world Ulthway during a rare mass transit event. The psychic scream from its dark core nearly shattered the craft world's infinity circuit. Eldar seers across the webway fell into comas, whispering the same phrase in ancient tongue. The bound one stirs. To the Necrons, still awakening across the galaxy, this was a clarion call. Distress signals flooded dormant tomb worlds. Tesseract matrices trembled. Records sealed by the Silent King himself began to blink warnings. The Blackstone fortresses were being unmade. The containment was breaking, for buried within the fortress's labyrinthine cores were fragments, residual echoes of Citan essence. Not full shards, not conscious entities, but traces, memory, potential. The last residue of beings once fed into their prisons during the closing of the war in heaven. And with the fortresses now twisted by warp corruption, those remnants began to change. Reports from Imperial survivors were inconsistent but horrific. Shadows that moved independent of light, tech priests consumed by glowing hunger, voices that promised truths in binary. Some said the fortresses were alive. Others said they had always been dead and were only now dreaming. Abaddon, for all his wrath, could not control what he had unleashed. The war culminated in the loss of 2 fortresses, one destroyed by inquisitorial sabotage, the other lost in a warp rupture so large it swallowed a third of the Aurar subsector. The Imperium claimed victory, but only in name. The truth was far more uncertain. In the aftermath, the surviving Blackstone fortresses vanished. Some believe they fell back into dormancy, hiding in deep space. Others were drawn to the webway, vanishing from real space entirely. The Imperium, wary of repeating past mistakes, issued edicts banning all investigation into their nature. All Mechanicus records were sealed, all data linked to their origin purged, but silence was never going to last. Necron tomb worlds began to stir with new urgency. Tomb ships changed course. Cryptex reopened files sealed for 60 million years. Dynasties once content to rebuild now turned their gaze outward, seeking the fortresses, some to reclaim them, others to destroy them before the warp could fully own them. Because they understood what others did not. The Blackstone fortresses were never meant to be used. They were locks, and someone had turned the key. And the Citan, those who remained, those still broken, still watching, felt it. The bindings were weakening, not completely, not yet. But the echo of their prisons being shattered was like a heartbeat through the void, a reminder that the galaxy had forgotten how much it had once feared them, and what it had buried. The Gothic War was not a war of territory. It was not even truly a war of chaos versus order. It was a test to see what would happen when the locks were undone. And far from the ashes of the Gothic sector, in places where no light reaches, the fragments of forgotten gods began to hum. They remembered the taste of freedom, and they were waiting. At the edge of Segmentum Obscurus lies a quiet place of haunted repute, a cluster of ruined systems scattered around a collapsed star. Few ships chart a course through it, fewer return. Even the orcs avoid it, and the Eldar speak its name with caution. It is known simply as the Varl Expanse, and in its center stands the derelict husk of an ancient war zone, a debris field formed not by time, but by purpose. Here lies the wreckage of hundreds of ships, Imperial, Xenos, unknown. Floating monoliths drift in precise formations, seemingly frozen in the act of collapsing into each other, yet untouched by time. Among these structures are strange obelisks, black, perfect, and alien, embedded into the core of shattered moons and dead asteroids. This is the site of the Gates of Varl. To the Imperium, Varl is a historical curiosity, a footnote buried in the archives of ancient expeditions. But to those who know the old wars, those who whisper of the Catan, Varl is more than a graveyard. It is a threshold. Long ago, during the aftermath of the war in heaven, the Necrons and the Old Ones fought one final war, not for dominance, but for containment. They had seen what the Citan had become, parasites turned gods, predators made divine, and understood that mere victory over them was not enough. Even shattered, the Citan could regenerate, reform, reassert. The solution was brutal. Varl was chosen as one of 6 terminal crucibles, locations where the very fabric of reality could be bent, sealed, and knotted into a knot of locked potential. At Varl, the Necrons constructed an apparatus unlike anything else in their empire, the Continuum Veil, a phase reality barrier that not only trapped Citan shards in localized null zones, but disrupted their cosmic influence. It wasn't just a prison. It was a blindfold, a muzzle, a veil that stripped gods of their ability to be perceived. The gates of Varl were not gates in the traditional sense, but interwoven obelisks, each one a core component of a massive dimensional seal. Positioned with Necron precision and Old One's psychic latticing, they formed an invisible dome across entire light years, maintained by self-repairing constructs and phase-looped pylons fed by collapsed suns. Within this veil, the final remnants of particularly dangerous Citan shards were trapped, so fragmented they barely retained consciousness, yet still powerful enough to distort time, matter, and emotion. And then, as the galaxy moved on, Varl was forgotten. The tomb worlds slumbered, the old ones vanished, the seal remained until the modern age. The Great Rift had barely torn across the galaxy when the first fractures appeared. Warp storms around the Varl expanse began to distort with abnormal frequency. Explorator fleets dispatched by the Adeptus Mechanicus reported impossible readings, gravitational anomalies that shifted like tides, time loops that consumed entire convoys. Servitors began speaking in reversed Gothic, warning of voices beneath the light. One fleet attempted to land on the largest of the fractured moons within the veil. They vanished, but their signal did not. It pulsed once, and across dozens of Necron tomb worlds, ancient alarms activated, alarms that had not sounded in 60 million years. The veil was weakening. Zarek, the Silent King, felt it. He had passed through the edge of the Varl expanse once during his self-imposed exile, long ago before Guilliman's return, before the Cicatrix Maledictum split the stars. Even then, he had sensed something wrong, an emptiness that was not absence, but hunger, waiting. Now, in the wake of the Imperium's psychic catastrophes and the Necron dynasty's fragmented awakening, Zarek returned to Varl. He came not with armies, but with emissaries, cryptex of the highest order, Lichguard bearing phase glyphs older than any Forge world. Together they descended into the ruin. They found the seal unraveling. Of the original obelisks, only half remained intact. The others were cracked, some shattered, others dim, bleeding strands of light that twisted into the void like spectral limbs. The continuum veil flickered, its once immovable phase lattice disrupted by warp bleed and gravitational corruption. But the most chilling discovery was not structural, it was auditory. The veil was speaking, not in sound but in rhythm. A low, pulsing thrum that repeated in perfect intervals, like the heartbeat of something remembering itself. Necron sensors filtered it into logic patterns. Translated, the pulses formed a phrase, one repeated again and again, "I am becoming." The Silent King issued a decree. The gates of Varl were to be sealed again at all costs. The Necrons constructed anchor pylons across the Varl expanse, reactivating long-dormant weapon satellites and deploying phase fortresses to guard the outer edges. Tomb fleets engaged in ongoing wars were rerouted to Varl without explanation. Entire dynasties were summoned, not to conquer, not to expand, but to stand guard. For what stirred within the shattered seal was not a full god, not yet. It was a mind, a will, a composite of Citan essence fragments slowly drawn together by the warping of the veil and the chaos of the rift. None knew which star god it might have once been. Some suspected it was a shard of the outsider, driven mad in exile. Others believed it was a new synthesis, a composite intelligence made from what was never meant to rejoin, but it was thinking. And worse, it was learning. The Imperium, of course, remained unaware of the true scale of the danger. They dispatched a handful of battle fleets to pacify the Varl expanse after reports emerged of Xenos activity and anomalous readings. Most were destroyed. A few made it through the edge, long enough to glimpse the impossible. One rogue trader's Vox recorder, later retrieved by a black ship, recorded a single coherent transmission. "The stars are knots. I am the knife." The Ordo Xenos classified Varl as a non-access zone. The Inquisition closed the record, but the Necrons did not forget. They called the entity behind the veil Anumtek, the Whispering Unborn. And they watched. They fortified. But none among them, not even Sarek, could say how long the veil would hold. The gates of Varl are still closed, barely. But if the whispers are true, they are listening back. And when they open, not to unleash what was, but what should never have been, there will be no prophecy, only return. Far beyond the galactic rim, beyond even the reach of the Necron dynasties, there exists a place without stars, no light, no sound, no name. A silence so profound it seems to swallow reality itself. A hollow expanse where time does not flow, where gravity has no pull, where even the warp recoils in confusion. No charted map reaches it, no imperial archive acknowledges it. The Eldar refuse to speak of it, and the Necrons, for all their godlike arrogance, approach it only in legend. It is the exile of the outsider. Among the Citan, the outsider was never like the others. The Nightbringer embodied death, the Deceiver wielded manipulation, the Void Dragon pursued domination over the material universe. But the outsider consumed, not merely in the way all Citan fed on souls or stellar energy. No, his hunger was deeper, stranger. It was directed, singular. He consumed his own kind, during the twilight of the war in heaven, while the Citan were at the apex of their power, and the Necrons still marched beneath their banners. The outsider had already begun to retreat from the theater of war. He spoke less to his kin. He acted erratically. Some among the Necrons believed him possessed of a grander vision. Others feared the truth. The outsider had turned upon the other Citan. No motive was ever given. No justification whispered. Perhaps it was jealousy, perhaps it was fear, or perhaps, as some cryptechs theorize in data vaults that no other mind may access, the outsider understood something about the Citan that the rest did not. Something flawed, something wrong. And so he began to consume. One by one, the outsider sought out his kin, not in war but in ambush. He did not shatter them as the Necrons would later do. He absorbed them, inhaled them, broke their consciousness down and folded it into his own, becoming more than a singular god. He became a chorus of stolen divinity, and it drove him mad. The act of consuming other Citan was not without consequence. Their minds did not die. They lingered, imprisoned within the outsider's own vast consciousness. They whispered to him, cried out, lied, begged, shouted secrets into his mind until his once pristine thought fractured into 1,000 colliding identities. He became an echo chamber of madness, half predator, half prisoner. The Necrons, sensing something monstrous emerging, even by their standards, devised a solution not of betrayal, but banishment. They did not fight the outsider. They did not challenge him. They lured him, fed him a lie, a constructed realm on the edge of reality, a pocket of existence hidden beyond gravitational shears and psychic null zones. They told him it was his own. He entered willingly, and they sealed it behind him. There he has remained for over 60 million years, but sealed does not mean silent. The Exile Zone, what the Eldar call the Halo Scar, and what the Necrons list only as Sector XZ Black Null, is not empty. It teems with anomalies. Vessels lost in the warp occasionally emerge near it, crippled and hollow, their crews whispering in unknown tongues before dying with eyes wide open in madness. Astropathic signals vanish into static within light years of the region. The Mechanicus once sent an exploratory fleet to probe the dark. It returned with no data, only a dream that spread like a mimetic plague among its tech priests, a maze of mirrors, a voice in every reflection, and behind each pane, another god begging to be let out. The Imperium purged the fleet, burned the data, buried the incident, but the Necrons knew better. In rare conclaves, the Silent King speaks of the outsider in hushed code, never with certainty, always with caution. To awaken the others is to risk war. To awaken the outsider is to risk something worse, because he is not whole, he is not even broken, he is fragmented within himself, and yet he dreams. Unlike the Nightbringer, whose shards were scattered in fury, or the Deceiver, whose pieces slither through the galaxy like lies given form, the outsider remains largely intact, self-contained, suspended, but not inert. The Necrons' oldest star maps, etched into data obelisks formed before biotransference, mark fluctuations in the region. Small changes, distortions in gravitational lensing, flickers of chronal reversal, as if something inside the void is shifting, rearranging itself, testing the edges of its prison. Something is waking. The Eldari, for all their superstition and trauma, maintain an ancient prophecy among the Black Library, that a being once called the Star Eater will return when the galaxy begins to choke on its own sins, that he will come not as a conqueror, but as a cleansing. The Harlequins call him the Laughing God's Shadow, a joke with no punchline, a hunger with no mouth. But the most terrifying part is not what the outsider may do when he returns. It is what he has already become. He is no longer just one Citan. He is many. Their minds, their flaws, their contradictions, melded into a singular, unknowable entity that no longer understands the boundaries of self. The outsider may no longer even recall his purpose, or perhaps he now has every purpose. Perhaps he has all of them. Or none at all. Some Necron cryptex believe that if the outsider ever escapes, he will not wage war. He will redefine it. A walking paradox, a god whose identity is a collision of forgotten truths and consumed consciousness. A being so psychologically unstable that reality itself might shatter in his wake. Not because of what he wants, but because he won't know what he wants. He will hunger, and the stars will wither, trying to feed him. Zarek's tomb fleet has stationed monitors at the periphery of the exile zone, not to engage, not to interfere, just to watch, and pray that watching is enough. Because no one, no dynasty, no species, no god wants to open that cage, not when the only thing behind it is a god who has already eaten himself. The galaxy is ancient. Its wounds are older than memory, its ghosts older than the stars that shine overhead. Empires rise in fire and fall into dust. Gods are born, chained, shattered, and still their echoes walk among the living. In the long history of the cosmos, there is no peace, only the quiet between screams. But even in the darkness, something endures. Hope. It is not the hope of the Imperium, fanatical and blind, anchored to a corpse on a throne. Nor is it the sterile logic of the Necrons, who mistake order for salvation. It is not the decadent dreams of the Eldari, nor the chaotic revelry of the Warp-born. No, the hope that lingers is older, stranger, seated in the very ashes of the gods. It is the hope that the Citan might never return. Not fully, not again. Across the galaxy their legacy remains, a shattered pantheon strewn like broken glass across the night sky. Shards of thought, hunger, and memory, each piece a sliver of impossible power, still dangerous, still potent, but no longer what they were, not truly. The Citan are fractured, they are wounded, they are afraid. For the first time since their birth in the white light of the early stars, the Citan exist in a galaxy that has learned. The Necrons remember what it took to break them. The Eldar remember what it cost to survive them. Even the younger races, unknowingly, have built machines and doctrines that resist their touch. And the Shards, they know this. The Nightbringer stalks the void as a fragment of terror, feared but hunted. The Deceiver whispers but finds fewer willing ears, minds now armored with experience. The Void Dragon pulses beneath Mars, its thoughts sensed by machine priests, too naive to understand the leash they may have unknowingly fastened. The Outsider, lost beyond the rim, remains the galaxy's greatest unanswered question. His hunger festers in exile, his madness restrained not by force, but by isolation. And yet the stars have not burned out. For every world the Citan rend, 1,000 others resist. For every civilization they manipulate, another rises too fast for them to root deep control. The galaxy turns, and in its endless war and ceaseless suffering, it grows unpredictable. It is this unpredictability that offers the only true check against the return of the star gods. For all their power, the Citan are bound by what they are. They do not understand chaos, not the kind born from freedom and failure, from desperation and passion. They were never meant to. They are hunger. They are certainty. They are patterns written in starlight, but the galaxy is no longer their playground. It is a battlefield of contradictions. The warp, once an irrelevance to the Citan, now rules much of real space by proxy. The Chaos Gods, immaterial, unstable, antithetical to the logic of the Star Gods, cannot be touched, fed upon, or extinguished by the Citan, as they once were the Eldar or humanity. To face chaos is to face what the Citan cannot understand, to face the unknowable. The Necrons, too, have changed. Once servants, now jailers. The dynasties, though fractured and often hostile to one another, still share protocols, warning signals, containment technologies, war doctrines designed for one singular enemy. The ancient pacts of the Silent Concord still flicker in their code. If a god rises, we bury it. It is not loyalty, it is not vengeance, it is survival. Across the Imperium, rumors of Citan resurgence are met not with panic, but with response. The Adeptus Mechanicus, blinded though it is by dogma, has begun to catalog anomalies that match ancient Xenos patterns. The Ordo Xenos has files, most redacted, some erased, but they exist. They are read, and they are acted upon. Kill teams are sent not to learn, but to contain. And sometimes they succeed. In a remote system near the Ghoul Stars, an awakened shard believed to be a splinter of the Magister of the Deep, an unknown aquatic-aligned Citan, was trapped in the gravitational matrix of a neutron star by a coordinated Mechanicus and Deathwatch task force. It now pulses in orbit, inert but aware, singing hymns in languages long dead. No one dares move it, but it does not escape. Elsewhere, the Eldar wage private wars against what they call the Reflected Ones, shards of the Deceiver that mimic ancient Eldari deities in form and speech. Entire craft worlds dedicate themselves to hunting them, carving star maps not of routes, but of warnings. It is not mercy they show, it is memory. Even the Tyranids, alien, instinctual, unknowable, have reacted to the Citan. There are records, still debated, of hive fleets avoiding tomb worlds where Citan signatures bleed from the soil. Others speak of tyrannid organisms infected by Citan influence, twisting into forms not sanctioned by the hive mind, only to be destroyed by the swarm itself. as if the great devourer recognizes a predator it cannot consume. And in the deepest dark, where Trazyn, the infinite, hoards history like a miser hoards gold, more than one shard sleeps in containment, not as trophies, as lessons, because Trazyn knows the galaxy is not prepared to fight a unified Citan threat again, but it might be prepared to prevent one. And so the war continues, not of armies, not of gods, but of containment, of secrecy, of vigilance. Hope endures not because the Citan are gone, but because the galaxy remembers what they once were, and that memory burns brighter than fear. Zarek, the Silent King, watches from afar. He does not move quickly, he does not speak often, but he sees, and he acts. His war is not of worlds, but of timelines. He moves not to rule, but to delay, to hold the Citan at bay, to buy the galaxy time for evolution, for resistance, for redemption. Perhaps he still believes, somewhere deep in his ancient mind, that there may one day be peace, that there may be a new beginning, hope eternal. And in the distant stars, scattered and shattered, the Citan wait. Some seek to return, some seek revenge, but some, just a few, begin to doubt. For the first time in their long, godlike lives, they feel it, irrelevance. And for a being born to be worshipped, there is no greater death. This is not the end of the star gods, but it may be the end of their dominion. And in that truth, beneath the blood and fire of the 41st millennium, there lives a spark, a sliver, a whisper, hope.